My name is Lena Calloway, and I grew up believing that family meant loyalty above everything else. My grandmother used to say it with such conviction. Family first, always, that I never thought to question what happened when family was the thing that needed questioning. I was 26 when my grandmother died. She left behind a small house in Asheville, North Carolina, a savings account worth $84,000, and a handwritten will that said the money was for me. For college, she'd written in her careful, slanted cursive, "For Lena's future, she's the one who stayed." I was the one who stayed. While my mother's sister, my aunt, had moved to Phoenix 15 years earlier and sent birthday cards that arrived 2 weeks late, I had driven my grandmother to chemotherapy every Tuesday for 2 years. I had learned which soup she liked when her stomach hurt, which game shows she fell asleep to, how to help her from the couch to the bathroom without making her feel like she needed help. When she died on a Wednesday morning in March, I held her hand. My aunt flew in for the funeral, wore a black dress she'd bought the night before, and stood at the graveside with the expression of someone trying to look like they were feeling something. 3 weeks later, she took the money. But here's what I didn't know then. What I couldn't have known is that 1 year later, she would stand in front of a room full of people at my cousin's wedding rehearsal dinner and hear every one of those texts read aloud. Every word. In front of her own daughter. That's where this ends. Let me start from the beginning. My grandmother's name was Vivian Marsh. She was 79 when she died, and she had been the most consistent person in my life since I was 8 years old, which was the year my parents' marriage finished collapsing, and my mother started spending most of her time trying to hold herself together. I don't say that to be cruel about my mother. She did the best she could. But the best she could, back then, wasn't much. And my grandmother understood that without anyone having to explain it. I spent more nights at my grandmother's house than I did at my own through most of middle school. She taught me to make pie crust from scratch, to keep a budget in a little notebook, to read the fine print on anything before signing it. "Knowledge protects you," she'd say. "Ignorance is expensive." She wasn't a wealthy woman. The $84,000 in that account had been built over 40 years of careful living. Coupons, no vacations, the same Ford Taurus for 17 years. She'd added to it slowly, deliberately, always with the same goal. She told me once, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of decaf she didn't really want, that she'd watched too many people in her generation reach old age with nothing to show for their frugality, because they'd handed everything to children who spent it in a year. "I want you to have a real start," she said. "Not a handout. A foundation." She made me the sole beneficiary of that account in a will she'd written with an attorney 6 years before she died. The house was to be sold and split 3 ways, between my mother, my aunt, and a small donation to her church. But the savings account was mine. My aunt found out about the account at the will reading. I watched her face when the attorney said the number. She smiled, this thin, held smile, and said, "Of course, whatever mother wanted." She hugged me in the parking lot afterward and said, "You deserve it, sweetheart. You were there for her in a way I couldn't be." I believed her. That's the part that still sits uncomfortably in my chest when I think about it. I believed she meant it. 2 months later, I was still waiting for the funds to transfer. The attorney's office had said 6 to 8 weeks for probate. I wasn't worried. I had a small amount in savings, a job at a dental office where I'd been working for 3 years, and a plan. I was going to use the money to finish my nursing degree, which I'd had to pause when my grandmother's health declined, and I'd cut back to part-time hours. Then my aunt called. It was a Tuesday evening. I was eating leftover pasta standing over the sink, because I hadn't bothered to sit down. "Lena," she said, her voice careful the way people's voices get when they're about to say something they've already decided on, "I need to talk to you about the estate." I put the fork down. She told me that she had spoken to the attorney, that there had been a complication, that my grandmother's savings account had been set up as a joint account with right of survivorship, meaning that because my aunt's name was on it as a secondary holder, the funds had transferred automatically to her upon my grandmother's death. outside of probate, outside of the will. I'm so sorry, she said. I didn't know it was set up that way either. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was trying to understand the shape of what she was telling me. So the money went to you, I said. Legally, yes. A pause. I want you to know I feel terrible about this. What happens now? I asked. Well, another pause, longer this time. That's actually what I wanted to discuss. What she wanted to discuss. What she had already decided, I would later understand, was that she would give me $10,000 out of 84 as a gesture of goodwill, as recognition of everything I had done for Mother. $10,000. I remember the specific feeling of that moment. Not rage, not yet. Something quieter and colder, like stepping onto ice you didn't know was there. My grandmother wanted me to have that money for school, I said. I know, and I honor that intention. She had clearly practiced this. But legally the situation is what it is. I can't just hand over money that's in my account because of a document that didn't account for how the account was structured. My attorney has advised me. You've already spoken to an attorney about this. Silence. Lena, I'm trying to do right by you here. $10,000 is a generous. I said I had to go. I hung up. I sat on my kitchen floor for a while, not dramatically. I just sort of ended up there. The linoleum was cool, and I pressed my back against the cabinet and tried to think clearly. My grandmother had sat across from me at that same table and told me about this money. She had used it as a reason for me to stay, to keep showing up, to be present. Not transactionally, that wasn't how she meant it, and I know that. But she had made a promise, in her way, and I had built a plan around it, and now someone who hadn't been in Asheville for a single chemotherapy appointment was sitting in Phoenix with $84,000 that wasn't hers. I opened my phone and started a text thread with my aunt. I wasn't strategic about it at first. I was just asking questions, trying to understand. When did you find out about the account structure? Did Grandma know you were listed? Did she set it up that way intentionally? My aunt's answers came slowly over the next few days, vague at first, then slightly less vague. Then, when I kept asking, less careful. She had known about the account for years. My grandmother had added her name when she was first diagnosed, as a practical measure. My aunt's words. So that bills could be paid if my grandmother became incapacitated. My aunt had taken my grandmother to the bank to set it up. During one of her rare visits to Asheville, 3 years before my grandmother's diagnosis even became serious. My grandmother, I would later confirm through a conversation with the attorney's assistant, had not understood that this designation overrode her will. She thought the will controlled everything. The assistant told me gently, after I explained the situation. Older clients often don't realize that account designations and right of survivorship supersede the estate documents. It's a very common and very painful situation. Very common. Very painful. My aunt, meanwhile, had moved the money into a CD at her own bank within 2 weeks of my grandmother's death. I found this out from a text she sent my mother, which my mother, not knowing what my aunt had told me, forwarded to me thinking I already knew the details. The text said, moved Mama's money into a 14-month CD, getting 4.8%. Figured I'd let it grow a little before deciding what to do with Lena's portion. Lena's portion. $10,000 of $84,000, 12 cents on the dollar. I saved that forwarded text. I saved every text after that. Not because I had a plan yet, just because something my grandmother had told me, knowledge protects you, had settled into my chest and wouldn't leave. The months that followed were hard in the particular way that grief gets harder when something is wrong, and you can't fix it. I kept working at the dental office. I deferred my nursing program enrollment again. I told myself I would figure out another way to pay for school, maybe loans, maybe a different timeline, and I mostly believed myself. But I also kept asking questions. I spoke to a different attorney. Not to sue, I couldn't afford that, and I'd been told the legal pathway was murky at best, but to understand. He confirmed what I'd already been told. The right of survivorship designation was legally airtight. My grandmother's will, as written, did not control the account. My aunt had done nothing technically illegal. But, he said, looking at the texts I'd brought him, if she represented to you that she intended to honor your grandmother's wishes and then didn't, that's worth documenting. I was already documenting. What I didn't know in those months was that my cousin, my aunt's daughter, was planning her wedding, and that she wanted me there. We'd always been close, in the way that cousins are close, when one parent is the warm one and the other is the difficult one. We'd managed to have our own relationship despite our mother's complicated history. She called me in September, 8 months after my grandmother died, and asked me to be a bridesmaid. I said, yes. Because she hadn't done anything wrong. Because I genuinely loved her. And because, honestly, I didn't want my aunt to take that from me too. The wedding was in April. The rehearsal dinner was the night before, at a private room in a restaurant in downtown Asheville. My cousin's fiancé's family was from there, so they'd come east. My aunt had, of course, planned the rehearsal dinner. She arrived wearing a cream blazer, and the earrings my grandmother had left to her in the will. The small pearl ones. And she hugged people and refilled wine glasses, and played the role of gracious mother of the bride, with the ease of someone who had been performing warmth for decades. I wore the bridesmaid dress they'd chosen, and I smiled, and I helped arrange the centerpieces, and I said nothing. Until the moment when my aunt stood up to give a toast. She had a glass of champagne and notecards. She'd actually prepared notecards, and she began talking about family, about her mother, about how Vivian Marsh had instilled in all of them the importance of showing up for the people you love. About how she hoped her daughter and her soon-to-be son-in-law would carry that forward into their life together. She was crying by the end of it. Real tears, or close enough. Several guests were dabbing their eyes. And I thought, I have been quiet for 8 months. I did not plan what happened next. I want to be clear about that. But I'd been turning something over in my mind for a long time, and something about sitting in that room, listening to my aunt invoke my grandmother's name while wearing my grandmother's earrings, made the decision for me. I stood up. My cousin looked at me, surprised. This wasn't on the agenda. I'd like to say something too, I said, if that's all right. My aunt's smile stayed in place, but her eyes changed. Something shifted behind them. Of course, she said. I took my phone out of my pocket. I had the texts pulled up. I'd read them enough times that I almost had them memorized, but I wanted to read them accurately, word for word, so I held the phone and looked at it. My grandmother left me $84,000, I said. I heard the room go still. She saved it over 40 years for me to go to nursing school. She told me about it herself. She had a will. I paused. What she didn't know was that my aunt's name was on the account, and that meant the money transferred automatically when Grandma died. My aunt offered me $10,000. Someone set down a fork. I'd like to read some of the texts from the conversation we had about it. I looked at my aunt. She was very still. This is from March 14th. I asked her if she planned to honor Grandma's wishes. She wrote, I looked at the phone. I think we both know Mama would want the family to come to an understanding rather than make things adversarial. I'm asking you to trust me. I looked up. My aunt had set down her champagne. March 21st, I continued. I asked her to put in writing what she intended to give me and when. She wrote, Lena, I have told you what I'm prepared to offer. I don't think it's appropriate for you to demand documentation from family. That's not how we do things. The room was completely silent. April 3rd. My voice was steady. I hadn't known it would be, but it was. I asked her when I could expect to receive any funds. She wrote, I've already explained the situation. The money is in a CD and I'm not in a position to liquidate it. I hope you can find it in your heart to be gracious about a situation that's complicated for all of us. I put the phone down. Grandma said, knowledge protects you. I looked at my aunt. I've been carrying that knowledge for 8 months. I thought tonight felt like a good time to share it. I sat down. The room didn't erupt. It wasn't dramatic in the way of movies. It was quieter than that, and somehow worse. People looked at their plates. Someone coughed. My cousin's fiancé's mother leaned toward her husband and whispered something. My cousin across the table was looking at her mother with an expression I had never seen on her face before. My aunt set her notecards down on the table. She picked up her champagne glass and then put it down without drinking from it. When she finally spoke, her voice was controlled but thin at the edges. This isn't the time or place. Grandma used to say the right time is when you actually do it, I said. Otherwise it's just a good intention. My aunt looked around the room. At her daughter, at the guests, at her ex-husband, my uncle, who sat at the far end of the table with the expression of a man who was not at all surprised. I don't understand, my cousin said, quietly. She was talking to her mother. You told me the account situation was a legal technicality. You said Lena understood. It is illegal. You said she understood, my cousin repeated. She had her mother's precision with words, but none of her mother's protective coding. Did she understand, or did she not have a choice? My aunt didn't answer. My cousin looked at me. Her eyes were wet, not from the toast anymore. Lena, I'm so sorry. I didn't know all of this. I know you didn't, I said. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because you asked me to be here and I love you. She nodded, once, like she was trying to hold herself together. Then she looked back at her mother. We're going to talk about this, she said. It wasn't a question. My aunt said nothing. What happened after that was, in many ways, more uncomfortable than the moment itself. Dinners like that don't recover. Guests ate quickly. Toasts that had been planned weren't given. My uncle came and found me near the end of the night while I was getting my coat. For whatever it's worth, he said, I always thought she should have given you that money. I said so at the time. He shook his head. She doesn't like being told things. No, I said, she doesn't. He patted my arm once and left. My cousin called me at 11 that night from her hotel room. I could hear that she'd been crying. Not at me. I could tell the difference. She cried toward the phone for a while and I didn't say much, just listened. Because sometimes that's the thing. How much did she actually give you? She finally asked. Nothing yet, I said. The 10,000 she offered. She said she'd transfer it when the CD matures. My cousin was quiet for a long moment. The wedding's tomorrow, she said. I'm not going to let this ruin it. I want you to be there and I want it to be a good day. It will be, I said. After she said, I'm going to fix this, I didn't tell her she didn't have to. She was an adult making a decision with full information, and I had learned, slowly and expensively, that accepting help when it's offered is not the same as being helpless. The wedding was beautiful. My aunt walked her daughter down the aisle with her chin up, and her smile in place, because that was what the day required and she knew it. I stood at the altar beside my cousin and held her bouquet while she said her vows, and I thought about my grandmother, who would have loved the flowers, who would have cried at exactly the right moment, who had saved 40 years of careful money so I would have a foundation. 6 weeks after the wedding, my cousin transferred $74,000 into my account. She told me later how it had happened. She and her mother had a long, difficult conversation, the first of several, in which my cousin said plainly that she expected the money to be returned to me, or she would be transferring her own funds and severing contact with her mother until the situation was resolved. Her mother had tried several routes through that conversation. The legal technicality. The idea that this is between you and Lena, not you. The suggestion that I had embarrassed the family. My cousin, apparently, had looked at her mother and said, Lena embarrassed you. There's a difference. I didn't ask my cousin to do any of it. I want to be clear about that. She made that choice herself, with her own money initially set aside for a down payment, because she felt it was right. Her mother eventually, quietly, without a phone call to me, repaid my cousin directly. My aunt has not spoken to me since the rehearsal dinner. I've thought about whether that should feel like a loss, and I've decided that it doesn't, quite. What I feel is more like clarity. I can see the shape of things the way you can only see them when there's nothing in the way. I enrolled in the nursing program that fall, full-time. I finished in 2 years, the way I'd always planned, and the summer I graduated, I stood in the parking lot of the hospital where I just accepted a job offer, and I texted my cousin a photo. She wrote back. Grandma would be so proud. I knew she was right. I still have every text. I keep them in a folder on my phone, not because I look at them, I don't anymore, but because I think my grandmother was right about knowledge. It protects you. It keeps you honest. It means that when someone tells you something didn't happen, you have the means to say gently, but plainly, "It did." And here's how I know. There are people who will hear this and think I was cruel to do it at my cousin's rehearsal dinner. I've thought about that. I've tried to find the version of this where there was a better moment, a more convenient time, a place that didn't carry the weight of the people in that room. I don't think that place exists. I think that people who don't want to be accountable are very good at making sure there is never a convenient time, and that waiting for one is the same as not speaking at all. My grandmother saved money for 40 years. She sat across a kitchen table and told me it was for my future. She went to an attorney and wrote it into a legal document and believed, until the end, that she had protected it. I couldn't protect the document, but I kept the truth, and in the end, that was the thing that held. If you've ever been told that what happened to you didn't happen, or didn't count, or was a misunderstanding, I hope you know that your memory is evidence. Write it down. Save the messages. Know the facts, not because you're planning something, just because knowledge is the thing no one can take from you without your permission. And when the moment comes, not to perform, not for revenge, but just to say clearly what is true, you'll have everything you need.